health professional, say, for example, your physician. So I'm going to introduce Christy to you this evening. I met Christy, I had the pleasure of meeting Christy in 2016, and ever since then, she's been a true inspiration to me. It's a privilege to introduce you all to her. Hi, Christy, and welcome to TV Bible Light this evening. For those of you, as we go through our presentation this evening, if you have some questions or comments that you wish to share with us, at the bottom of the screen is a place where you can send text. There's also at Facebook as well. So Christy, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
It's a privilege. Thank you for having me on your show.
You're welcome. I wanted to start with asking, now, when I met you, you had were going through a lot of anxiety and depression.
Yes.
And what we're going to do is sometimes we know that these things don't always come out of a vacuum. And we know that there is, the people, each person has a story. Can you share with us a little bit about your childhood and upbringing?
I grew up in a loving Christian home. I had spent most of my academy years and also grade school years in Christian schools. I came from a pretty solid Christian background growing up.
And when did you start to notice some changes in your mood, like with depression and anxiety?
I'd like to say that I noticed something wasn't quite right even when I was the age of 12. And growing up, we had moved around quite a bit, and it seemed like I noticed something was off. I couldn't really put my finger on it because I wasn't familiar with the terms at that age, but it was about that time that my parents actually took me to a family physician for treatment.
Okay. So that we were talking last week about when some of those critical parts of the brain form, and that frontal lobe piece starts at about age 12, and that's when you started to notice some troubles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So share with us a little bit more as you went through that in those years prior to your recovery. What happened for you?
Growing up, it was difficult just throughout high school, and I made some poor life choices. I had gotten involved in alcohol in my teenage years and became an alcoholic, and I just really kind of veered off course and hung out with not the best crowd, and it just didn't turn out that great with some of the decisions that I made. So.
And even as you're sharing that, it's something that you're still even a little bit uncomfortable with.
It is.
And when you think, what would be some highlights if you were looking back now, that maybe there's somebody that's viewing tonight that's gone through some of those things, and we want to also provide people with some hope. What were some of the things that you may have noticed, some signposts that you could say, oh, these were certain turning points in the road?
I think I can't speak for everyone else, but my personal story was I just really wanted to fit in, and so having moved around a lot, I just was kind of the new kid. Everywhere I went, I kind of had to start over and make new friends, and I'd got picked on a little bit here and there, but when I would drink or basically do things like that, I felt like a part of the crowd, and so it was more like an acceptance thing to choose to do those things. So.
And a lot of people go through that at various stages of life. So here it was, you were thinking, I'm not being accepted, things aren't going well for me, and you were looking for a solution to the problem.
Yeah, pretty much. So.
And there were, in your story that you've shared previously, you've talked about some places where you got really low in life.
Yeah, there was a particular part. I work as a nurse, and so actually most of my background's intensive care nursing. And so at one point, I had been sober for about 6 years, and I had fallen off the wagon, for lack of a better term, and I had a gun. There's a lot of people in Texas that own guns. That's pretty much the norm here. And I actually took the gun outside and pulled the trigger because I didn't want to make a mess in my house, and the gun jammed. And that was after drinking a bottle of tequila on my own. So that was a pretty low point, actually a very low point in my life. So.
And in that moment, Christy, what happened for you?
It was a lot of emotions. I know I'd called a friend over to basically take the gun, and so he took the gun and looked it over and saw that there's no reason that it should have jammed. And my dad came over, and my dad spent the night at my house, and then the next day my dad took me to a psychiatric facility. And I'd been on a lot of medications. I think I was on maybe 6 psychiatric medications at that time. I was on Adderall for ADHD. I was on Ativan for anxiety. I was on Cymbalta for depression, Trazodone for sleep, just to name a few. So it was just a very tricky medication journey, because basically I would take one to calm down and then one to keep me focused. It was very, very tumultuous, not a lot of stability. So,
Yeah. It was quite a cocktail, it sounds like.
yeah.
And what was your personal life like at that time?
It was not the greatest. I didn't have very good relationships at that time. The relationship with my family was very strained. I was difficult to deal with, just with, the behaviors that I was engaged in. And it was not easy for my family at that time to have to kind of see the choices I was making. And my relationships were not the healthiest, just all the way around. It was a pretty lonely time, actually.
And we know, because we work as a whole organism, that when things aren't going well in one part of life, it's in all of our parts of our life. Like, in other words, I'm getting a sense from you that it wasn't just one area of your life that was impacted.
Right, that's correct. It was factorial, for lack of a better term, because, it bled over into my work life, it bled over into my home life. I also have a son that's going to be 8 the end of this month, and there was just a lot of things that were hanging in the balance. So it was pretty rough.
Yeah. So, what would you like to share with our viewers about what brought you into that part of recovery?
What really brought me into recovery was my mom actually was looking for a program that could help. She was at her wit's end. Her and my dad were trying everything they could to try to get me the help that I needed. I really didn't want anything to do with God or anything spiritual. But my mom found out about a program in California called the Nedley Depression and Anxiety Program. I know you said that's where we actually had met, was you were working there in California. So you got to see pretty much Christy in the raw there. but it was not anything that I sought after. It wasn't anything that I was actively wanting to do. And it was something that I agreed to do because my mom said it would be like a vacation, like a poolside vacation. I said, okay, sure, sign me up.
Yeah.
And,
A resort, no less. Yeah.
So that wasn't quite what turned out to be once I got to California. But that's how that kind of came about.
And prior, you mentioned having, before we get to that part, before you got to the recovery program, and you mentioned having some hospitalizations for
Yes.
for your illnesses. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
The first time that I was at the facility, based on the alcohol history, the physician at the time opted to basically cut me off all the benzos cold turkey. And at that point, I was starting to have auditory hallucinations, and I was realizing that reality was not congruent with what I was thinking. And I thought the staff was against me. I thought I had some really paranoid thoughts, and eventually they put me on more medication basically to treat the psychosis, and so it was just basically trading another medication out. So come to find out, that's not the best way to handle benzos. It should be a taper, and so that was really scary.
And that's a lot to go through physically as well.
Yeah.
It's hard on your system. And there were times that you said there was multiple times when you felt like you didn't want to live anymore.
There were other points in my life. One other time was basically I'd met a person that I thought was a friend in the intensive outpatient program. And my dad had been in a near-fatal car accident, so he had some access to some pretty potent pain medications. And this so-called friend asked if I would get some, and I did. And he proceeded to take this medication sublingually, basically under his tongue. And he went into respiratory distress in my car. I was able to kind of systematically run a code in a way due to my critical care background, and EMS came, they stabilized him, he didn't need to be intubated with a breathing tube, and he was okay. Everything turned out okay, but that gave me the idea, and so basically I put a thing on my phone that cut off all tracing on my cell phone, and drove an hour outside of Fort Worth. I got a hotel in the town of Glen Rose and did the same thing that he did, and I woke up 3 days later on my same side. In the ICU, we turn our patients every 2 hours to maintain circulation, and I couldn't feel my whole left side, so I was pretty scared. I ended up calling my dad, and they had pretty much decided that I was dead. They were making arrangements to basically have my house sold and have my things sold. But my dad came and got me, and I went back to the psychiatric facility at that point.
And when you woke up, what was your first thought?
Honestly, I was angry that it didn't work. I was disappointed that I was still alive at that point.
And so here you are in the ICU. You're on your left side, you don't have feeling. And your parents were thinking that that was it. Mm-hmm. And you are alive, and you were still here. Mm-hmm. And frustrated because you didn't want that to be actually here, and you were. And at that point, you were still fighting because you're thinking, I don't want to be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you went to the psychiatric hospital for the next time, what happened?
At that time, I just was really just in a bad place still, and I just really wanted to just get out, and I didn't know where I was going to go. I just didn't have any direction. I just knew that I was just frustrated and just unhappy with a lot of things in my life. And so that's the point where my mom brought up the Nedley program, was when I was actually still inpatient the second time. And I got to talk to Leanne, who was the intake coordinator, and she was going through a bunch of the history questions, and that's when I agreed to go to California.
Okay. You know what, Christy? We have a question here from someone. It says, "Hi, TV Bible Light. How would you encourage someone going through the same experience like you?"
I would encourage them through your actions. Just check on them. Just love them. Don't treat them any differently. It's really actions, I think, that helped me the most. I can't speak for your friend, but just continuously just being there for that person. It means a lot.
And for someone who might have gotten to that same low point that you did, what would you say to that person?
I would say that as long as there's life, there's hope. There is a light, and it gets better. Just keep trusting the process and take it a day at a time.
Okay. Because your growth and recovery wasn't overnight either.
No.
No. And someone's asking a question here, how have you changed since all these experiences from your past? So I think that can launch into the recovery piece.
Yes. In answer to that question, my life is vastly different. It's a lifelong journey. I mean, it's a day at a time and a daily walk. It's not something that anyone can say they've arrived, because that's dangerous, and no one has. But compared to where I was to now, I have so much more happiness, so much more joy. I don't do those lifestyle behaviors anymore. I choose not to. That just has no place in my life anymore. And there's so much more fulfilling things to do. I'm a much better place.
Yeah. And when did you experience, tell us a little bit more about that experience that changed your life, about going to the Nedley Depression and Anxiety Recovery Program. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Like the going through the program, or just like life after the program?
Going through.
Going through, okay. So you could probably speak to this because you're on the other side of things. But it was tumultuous. Going there, it was something that, I was smoking at the time, and I was really just wanting to, continue doing those things I was doing there. And that was not something that was, okay to do. So there was a lot of opposition at first. I tried to leave the program 5 times, packed my bag several times, and I was definitely difficult to deal with. You could speak from the staff perspective.
Well, when you and I have talked a little bit, and when we do this kind of work, and I work as a provisional psychologist and with people from every type of background, and being able to have the privilege of working in the Nedley program was certainly something that is life-changing from a staff perspective as well as a participant. And yes, there are people that come into the program that struggle more than others. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I could see that you were struggling. And I could see that it was hard for you. And I could see that even though sometimes it's like we'd rather have the devil we know than the angel that we don't, because we know that. And we're going to hold on to it as hard as we can. And so there was a lot of resistance on your part. And we're kind of stubborn as staff. We don't really give up that easy on people. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I just had some really amazing experiences as a patient in the program from the staff. I just, having been in these settings with, having been hospitalized and experiencing things in that setting compared to the program there, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced. The staff loved me back to life. That's what I like to liken it to. basically I can think of, one big scenario off the top of my head was the program director was Dr. Christina Harris, and she came to my room one night and cried on my bed. And I remember thinking, why? She doesn't even know me. Like, why would she care if I leave the program or not? Because she was basically trying to talk me into staying. And it's just the love and the care of the staff just are unprecedented. With yourself included, I think you walked with me around. They have this thing called the loop that we walk around, and I was trying to just stay away from everybody and everything, but you were there with me. I remember you were there with me, and when we walked that loop together. So it just was very persistent, caring love from the staff.
And it seems to be that ability to know that you were okay and you were accepted, even that you didn't feel from your teenage years, you actually felt that.
I did.
We have another question here. I'm going to have to open it, though. Hang on here. It's from somebody who says, I am a mother of 4, and finances are tight now. My husband left us 2 weeks ago for another woman. I have aging and sick parents and cannot see them due to lockdown. I have limited finances, and though I work from home, it is not enough. I have often considered the options you have mentioned. Please tell me how to stay above water and make sense in life.
It would be beneficial to have someone that you would feel comfortable talking with regularly, that knows your situation, that you feel is safe to talk to. Joy, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems to really help to have that person that you can rely on to keep you accountable and check on you if need be, and to not give up hope. That's one thing that, again, I know I said it before, but when there's life, there's hope. And just sometimes it's an hour at a time, sometimes it's a day at a time, but you will get through this and you can get to the other side.
Yes, and what I would add to that too, as a professional, for this woman that's a mother of 4, I am so very sorry that you were going through this right now. And from a professional point of view, I would, even with the lockdown, I would really encourage you to get some professional help. Contact I'm not sure where you're contacting us from. We have people across the country and maybe even other parts of the world with us this evening, but there are a number, through COVID, there are a number of mental health services available. You can call in if there's a distress or a crisis line, but I would very much echo what Christy is saying, is that not to lose hope. With some of my current patients that I am seeing, one of the interventions that I give them is when they're feeling flooded and they're feeling overwhelmed, what is the most important thing I need to be doing right now? And for some people, it may also be, what can I do in the next 5 minutes that is going to make a difference in my life tomorrow? And you have a very heavy load, but I want to encourage you that there is help out there, and I would encourage you to seek that help. And similar to Christy, if you have any supports and protective factors in your life, that you would access those as well. And I thank you very much for the question, because you may be echoing some other people that are going through this. So, Christy, when was it it sounds like you struggled a little bit in the program. When was it that things kind of started to come to light for you?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because it was definitely a struggle. I know Dr. Nedley's the doctor for the program, and he and I kind of laugh about this now. At the time, it wasn't so funny. But basically, the counselor in the program said, I'm not going to work. Dr. Harris is not going to work. We need you here, Dr. Nedley. And so they get Dr. Nedley, and I have my bags packed, and I'm coming from the 3rd floor in the inn, clunking down the luggage. He stops me, and he's like, so, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm getting a hotel in Colfax. And Colfax, California, it's not known for being the nicest part of town. And he said, no, Christy, we can't let you do that. We know what you do in hotels. And he asked me a very poignant question. He said, what have we done here that's harmed you? And I said, nothing. You haven't done anything that's been harmful. And I think at that point I threatened legal action. I said, I thought this was a voluntary program, and he said it is until it becomes involuntary. So basically, he had to call my parents because, as a critical care physician, you have to call the family when there's been a change in condition. And so he wasn't sure what he was going to get on the other end, in terms of what my parents were going to decide to have done. And they told him, no, please do everything you can to keep her there. And so it was pivotal that they said that, because otherwise he was considering sending me to Sacramento Psychiatric Hospital. So basically what I told Dr. Nedley at that point is, fine, send me, I'll fit in there. And just very, very irrational. And so he said, Christy, you know what happens in those facilities? He's like, they're going to put you back on those same medications. You're going to have the same outcome. If that's what you're wanting, we're going to have to do that. So he spoke with the staff and said the only way that she can stay, because I was a danger to myself at that point, was if they took shifts outside of my room and slept outside my room. And they did that. 3 of the staff members took turns sleeping outside my room, and I slept the whole night. The next day, something clicked. I know they talk heavily about the frontal lobe and circulation of the frontal lobe, and I was engaged for the 3-day program at that point. So.
And here you are today. And as you said, you were loved back to life, and there were some really tense moments.
That's right.
And I have another couple of questions before we go on to some more. And I think we can share some of these. So how do you get your thoughts from going to normal and then extreme as possible and start to freak about things that have not happened? I am struggling really bad with this no-contact human interaction. Thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, thank you. It's a privilege. That's a tough one. A lot of things that have been really helpful have centered around cognitive behavioral therapy, the CBT component. So taking the thoughts from A to B to C, realizing that there's a belief that can be changed, has been pivotal in my recovery. Joy, you could speak more to that, being that's your arena. But
okay, and actually I think with that question and some of the others we've got coming in here, that might warrant for next week for us to focus on the CBT and some of the things relating to the emotional intelligence part of things. So we can certainly follow up with that. But I would also say to that person too is that if you are able to access, there's some really great webinars on mental health, and it's on your thinking processes that you can access online, and even doing some, because we're not running things the way we are accustomed to, but being able to do some research online about the cognitive behavioral therapy and your thought processes. As I mentioned at the beginning, I do want to reiterate that this program is not meant to be for mental health treatment. This is about you sharing your story about hope and being able to encourage people to get help if they need it. So once again, I do want to encourage people, please, to access mental health professionals in your area, at the very least your medical doctor. I have another question here. There is a number of different things. And Christy, this might also reiterate with you and some of those challenges you had with God and some of that part. It says here, I have challenges with my faith in God when I'm undergoing depression treatment. What's the way to keep this faith as it should be? And they proceed to state that the Bible is often full of depressing and gloomy texts. And like Jesus said that there will be trouble in the world and there will be wars and stuff. Reading it makes me depressed, and Christians tell me to read it more. What shall I do?
I think at that point it might be good to reach out to your pastor or someone that could maybe have Bible studies with you. I know I can't speak for your story, but I know I used a lot of emotional reasoning and I still struggle with that. So I have to remember that feelings aren't fact, and that just because I feel something doesn't necessarily mean that's what's actually happening. With depression, I know there's many times that I didn't even feel like getting out of bed. So let alone read something complicated just seemed like a very daunting task. So try to be kind to yourself. Take it easy. Maybe start with Psalms or Proverbs or something a little bit lighter. I don't know, Joy, what do you think?
I would concur with you, and the other thing that I would add to that is that it's when you talk about the emotional reasoning, and if we're used to, like, there's a tendency towards depression, we're going to think that the glass is half empty instead of half full. And so it's also about, all the other texts in the Bible, like the promises, like the Psalms and Proverbs you're also talking about, and there's so many other things. And here again, because especially I don't have this person in front of me, I'm certainly not the expert, but I would really recommend being able to do some consults with a spiritual care person, pastor or somebody else that you might have contact with, or even to start looking at some inspirational programming and YouTubes that might help for you to answer some of your questions. Here's another one that another question. We're getting a few here now. I'm 19-year-old single mother. I had a baby to get out of depression so someone can love me, but it ain't easy for me. Why does nobody want to love me? My parents are conservative Christians who said to leave home and church, said I cannot no longer be there. I don't have help, aka I don't know where to go. I don't know where this person is texting us from. And Christy, before I get your thoughts, what I wanted to respond to this person is that depending, of course, on the area that they're in, I would here again really encourage them to seek out social agencies and other helps, because there are a lot, especially now, there's a focus in numerous parts of the world on being able to help people that are going through this, and they also have specific supports for single parents that are going through some of these. I don't know what you have in your area, but I would encourage you. And here again also, a lot of times physicians and other social agencies can have some places where they can refer you to. What would you say to this person, Christy?
First, my heart goes out to you. I'm really sorry that you're in that spot, and that sounds really hard, and it would be lonely. At least I'm thinking how I would feel if I were in your shoes. So I'm really sorry that you're going through this. Thank you for the courage of reaching out and asking that question. And I echo Joy. I think it would be beneficial to seek out that counsel and seek out some wise advice on what to do and where to go from here.
There's one here that that is coming from a male perspective. They say you have a professional lady there talking, but is there advice for men who get in troubles with their wives because the wives are drinking and sleeping in separate rooms? So I use some stuff to get out of the bad mood, but but there's some squabbles, it sounds like, that are happening in the home, and I am not a woman doctor, but I'm a psychologist. I'm not a physician or a doctor. But how can this help me, but not with me putting men down as she is a woman? Well, you know what? I'm going to just tell this person I'm not offended. I treat people on every end of the gender spectrum. So I would say that you have what sounds like relationship issues that are definitely compounded by the current situation. And once again, whether it's a male, female, whatever they're going through in your marriage and what's happening, if your spouse is willing and you are willing, I would be recommending that you seek some couple support. And there are special people online that are doing couples work right now in various areas. I once again would really encourage you to seek help from some of the agencies in your area. And obviously, strife and bad behavior is an equal opportunity employer, regardless of our genders. And I would really encourage you to seek some professional advice. There are a lot of very excellent male therapists, excellent psychologists out there that are male, if you would be more comfortable in seeking them out. And I would recommend that you do that. Christy, this is one for you, I think, because especially with the struggles that you were going through. Here's the question. It says, my question is, how shall spiritual care providers help people on cases that, like yourself? What can a spiritual care provider do for someone like that?
What helped me personally, again, I'm just speaking from my personal perspective, so I'm not speaking for everyone, but what helped me when I went through the program was just a non-judgmental attitude, just one that really was loving and heard what I had to say, but also was firm, because those boundaries were a very important piece. So to tell the truth in love, I think, is key.
Thank you very much, Christy, for sharing that. We have another question here. They're saying here, you say good things like, I like, why mind sicknesses for Christians when God is stronger? And why is God not healing all sicknesses? And in my conversations with you, you and I have often, I'm gonna just reply, but I want you to focus on this too, but good things happened to people. Bad things happen to people. And we live in a world that is not perfect. We live in a world that has a lot of sick and sinfulness and suffering in it. And if we were just going to expect everything was going to go well, I think that's unreasonable in our world. And now we've got a bit of a heightened sense of that. And I don't have the answers for that on this world, but I just know that they happen. But I do know with 100% assurity that we have hope for a future, and we have hope that this world is not all there is. What would you say, Christy?
You know, you pretty much hit the nail on the head with Jeremiah 29:11, that God has hopes not to harm us, but a future and a hope for each one of our lives. And that's a promise, and we can stake our lives on God's promises. And just like you, I don't claim to have any of the answers. I mean, a lot of these are questions I don't know the answer to either. But I know there's two opposing forces, and God is good, and His love is good, and He's victorious in the end.
Thank you. Yes, and we have that hope. Here's another one. This individual's wanting to know when would you recommend people check for their tendencies towards depression and other mental diseases? In other words, how soon in their age development?
Just from my perspective, Joy, you have a different perspective being active in the field, but just from what I've seen, I actually work in the depression and anxiety program now as Dr. Nedley's nurse about 3 to 4 times a year. And we're seeing participants younger and younger. You know, there's been reports of 11-year-olds that have attempted to end their life, but the program itself begins at the age of 13. And so I would say it's actually getting younger when it needs to be assessed. What do you think, Joy?
I would agree with you, and thank you very much. I'm seeing that in my practice as well. I also see in the last 20 to 25 years of my work, I would say that I've seen a change also in the intensity and also sometimes the triggers or the onset of these illnesses. And so there are some really good, we have a lot more research now than when I first started in the field. And so in answer to this question, I would say that when you start to, there's certain signs that kids develop at certain stages of development. We know about the formation and the final stages of development for that frontal lobe of the brain starts between the ages of 12 to 14, doesn't finish till between the ages of 25 to 30. Any damage that happens in that time we know can certainly impact that developmental process. But if you're starting to notice kids being sad, a lot of times for young children, this is brought on by bullying at school. Sometimes it can be brought on by chemical and hormonal balances that people go through at different times and stages of life in that adolescent period. So it's also, if you're speaking about it from a parental point of view, it's about really knowing your kids and notice when you start to see changes and getting them help. Someone is saying here, thanks for the great program. They're wanting to know about future presentations. And I will provide some of this information that you're asking for at the end. You can also text us. We had a program last week that you might be interested in, and it was focusing on some pieces to mental health. And we will be doing some in the future. And I just, as I've been hearing you talk this evening, I wanted also to, one of the things that you'd shared with me, Christy, that the part that gave you hope was when you went to the Nedley program, you learned in some of the seminars about how the brain could be changed and the neuroplasticity. Can you tell me some more about that?
Absolutely, that's one of my favorite things to talk about. So there's a component or a fact of our brain that our brains are actually much more plastic than it is rigid. And so what that means is basically neuroplasticity basically means that the brain can change. And what can help the brain change is our thinking and by diet and exercise. And it's all kinds of things that you can modify and be proactive about. It's likened basically thoughts like powder or fresh packed snow. When you're skiing, basically you have to keep going over the new pathways over and over again until that pathway in the brain sticks. And this is the really, really good news. It's a lot harder to go back to the old pathways once you form these new, better pathways. And so you can keep forming and keep reinforcing these better ways of thinking and these better ways of living to where it's so much harder to have these more basically pathways again. So it's very, very good news. Very good news.
And even as I asked you those questions, you lit up as you were talking about them. And so that in and of itself gives the hope that we can make changes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I see that in my work frequently as well. In fact, I utilize the cognitive behavioral therapy as my main therapeutic and theoretical background and my go-to model. And I also find that when people have an understanding of the brain, similar to yourself, when they understand the structures of it and what's impacted and the things that they can do on a day-to-day basis that can impact it, that's empowering as well. Tell us a little bit more about some of the things that you learned in the Nedley program that you do every day that helps you to maintain your brain and your mental health.
There's kind of an algorithm that I choose to follow because it's we talked about this before, but it's kind of like a diabetic taking their insulin. I have a propensity towards depression, so I need to manage those things. So in the morning, I choose to do early to bed, early to rise. So I go to bed early, maybe about 9, 10 o'clock, and I get up at 4 in the morning. I had never was a morning person before the program. I would have thought that was crazy had you asked me to get up that early, but now it's something that I do. Then I'll do devotions, and then while doing devotions, there's a blue light that basically hits the eye at a different frequency, and it helps with circadian rhythms, and so it will help with the melatonin, serotonin production. And so you do that within 30 minutes of awakening for about 30 minutes, I believe is the recommendation. And that sets the stage for the hormone production. And that is very lasting. And that's highly recommended too. You'd mentioned in the places that are closer or farther away from the equator. So that may be helpful for those in Canada. And then also I work out pretty religiously to keep the brain chemistry, because it's better even for the brain than it is for the body to exercise, and try to eat a plant-based diet. So these are things that have definitely helped me a lot with brain chemistry and feeling good.
Well, thank you very much for that. We've got a couple more questions here. What would you recommend, and both of us are first responders in a different way here. It says, what would you recommend for first response team members and frontline responders who struggle with the emotional and rational challenges with the current crisis? Thank you very much for that question, by the way.
Just speaking from being a nurse on the front line and also having struggled with anxiety and depression, what has been helpful has been the thinking component, and seeking out counsel from friends and family, and just staying connected, and just really practicing these thinking habits have been key.
Thank you, and I would agree. I actually have some first responders on my caseload currently who are in the hospital frontline as well as in corrections. And in Canada, we just had an incident here last weekend where our largest mass shooting in our country's history. 2 of the individuals that were lost were corrections workers, and this has impacted. I was just even on a conference call today. I volunteer with a federal committee, and and this has really hit that community. My point in bringing that up is that the things that you're talking about, Christy, those day-to-day self-care, mental health maintenance pieces are absolutely critical. Making sure also that your diet is good, the nutrition, getting the nutrients that the brain needs, getting enough water, sleep, and the exercise. I'm similar to you. The exercise is absolutely critical for me as well. And so I would say for the frontline responders is to do your self-care the best you can. One of the other things that they're recommending for many organizations and many of the mental health credentialing bodies are stating for people to ensure that they also maintain, even if it's with physical distancing, that they maintain contact with their support systems, with their family members, whether it's their aging parents or if they're not able to be with their children because they need to be in isolation because of their work, depending on where they're responding to, but just to be able to maintain and get what they need when they're not working. This is absolutely critical. And in fact, I would encourage those folks, many of the organizations that they work for, the health regions and the health authorities, are providing resources for these first responders. There are a ton of websites available. There are sections on them relating to COVID and the responders for that as well. And so, Christy, I've got one more here. Here's one that how can frontline responders practice self-care to stay well emotionally? I think we've answered this, behavioral, mentally, relationally, physically, spiritually, sexually, and rationally. And I think that, there's a lot in that question. And that's, the whole person. And I would say some of those same things as being able to have balance and institute balance probably now more than ever. What would you say? You're working in a hospital setting. I'm working, on the mental health side. And I've been actually home for, I finished my 7th week this week doing sessions from home. And from the hospital side, what would you say, Christy?
First off, I'm sorry I didn't say this before to the other question, but thank you for what you're doing. You're doing some amazing, brave work, and I just want to thank you on behalf of, just so many people that takes some real courage and bravery. But I echo what Joy said, basically to make sure that you make time to fill your cup, because you have to, as they say, put the oxygen mask on yourself, and then the person you're helping, because you also need to make sure that your own mental health is okay and that you're able to take care of yourself. It's not selfish to do that. You're actually doing a greater good because you're able to help others when you take care of yourself.
Yes, thanks so much for that. And I too want to say thank you to all those first responders out there that are in the front lines. We appreciate you so very much. We are nearing the end. We've got about 7 more minutes left. And I wanted to touch on, we were talking about the Nedley program, and it's been, you and I have talked about it, and I've talked, of course, with Dr. Nedley, and we've worked on it. We really want to bring a residential program to Canada. It's been on my heart for about 5 years now, and so I still pray about it daily, and I'm hoping that that will come to fruition. And in the meantime, though, even just this week, the Nedley program has launched ways to do their program online. So you can look that up, look them up online, and I can certainly provide that contact information. And in giving some final parts of hope, Christy, tell us more about what life is like for you now.
Oh, my friend, life is so good. I'm so thankful. I never thought I would be grateful for my depression, but I am, because I would have never met beautiful people like yourself and those in the program. And I'm just so grateful that God can basically turn a terrible situation into something good. And only He can do that. And that's Romans 8:28. And I want to say, please, if you're watching this and you're struggling, do not give up hope. There is life. I got a promotion.
Christy, we're having a little bit of trouble with the audio. Can you go back a little bit and just repeat what you were saying? Start from when you were so excited and you mentioned Romans 8:28.
Yeah, no, life is really good. Of course, there's ups and downs, just like anyone else's life. But I got a promotion at work, and I attribute that to learning emotional intelligence, which can be learned. Anyone can learn it, and it can be improved. And I love spending time with my son. He's going to turn 8 on the 29th. Hi, Liam. And he's just the highlight and joy of my life. My relationships are so much better. I actually have a relationship with my brother and sister-in-law now, which I never had. And my parents and I have a very good relationship, and it's been a wonderful experience. And I take joy in such the little things now, like a sunrise or a sunset. So it's good. Life is good. I'm very thankful.
And Christy, I just want to thank you so much. I count it a privilege to know you, and to be able to have gotten to know you, and be, to even, be part of the experiencing your metamorphosis, and in the butterfly, and that whole thing that you've become today. And I just want to thank you so much for your time, and for sharing with us, especially during this time of added stress for people during the COVID-19 and the multifaceted ways that this is impacting our lives. I also want to mention to our viewers, if you have some particular topics that you would find helpful in the upcoming weeks, please do send us a note, and we will try to accommodate that as soon as well as possible. And Christy, any final words that you might want to say to our folks this evening?
You were loved, you are unique, and you are here for a purpose. And just ask that you just keep doing the next right thing, and you will have good results.
So before we close, I just want to encourage you all to be back here next week at 6 o'clock. We will have another program for you with some information. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you so much for your questions. Christy, thank you so much too. Would you like to close us with a prayer?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Joy. Dear Father God, I just thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about what you did in my life, Lord. And I just want to ask a special blessing over Joy and their ministry there in the studio. And I just want to ask a special blessing with each person that was joining us viewing this program this evening. And just continue to lead and guide us through these uncertain times. And please continue to be our our guiding light, and we know that we can trust you even if we can't see what's in front of us, Lord. So we thank you and give you all the honor and glory and praise. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. See you all next week. Thank you, Christy.
Of course.